Following on from our previous conversation, John, on salvation, this time we're going to change tack. And you and I don't agree on most things, but there is one thing I think that I'm safe to say we do agree on, and that is you don't see life as it is. You see life, or you experience life as you are, in general terms. In other words, our mindset, we are complicit in creating our reality. So, where does our experience of suffering fit into that? Do we create our own suffering?
You do ask a difficult questions, Phil. I really have to scratch my head, don't I, with some of these things. Oh, what can I pull out of the bag today? I seem to remember when I first heard that. I can't remember when that was. Somebody said it to me. And I thought about my own experience. I thought it was a very unkind thing to say. And when someone is suffering, to say you create your own suffering is just another, adds to the suffering, doesn't it? Rubs it in, exactly. Well, rather grudgingly, I suppose I must agree. Well, I'm quite used to saying, aren't I, that when I talk about sin, that the first of sinners is me. It all starts with me. And the whole basic cause of all the world's suffering, and all, not only the suffering, but all that we consider bad in the world, is basically my fault as the first of sinners. Well, that's a big pill for anyone to swallow. And suffering could be included in that, because suffering is obviously a consequence of sin, of getting it wrong. And where does that start? So it brings us back to this very first cause of why we're in this world, not in paradise. Who turned away from paradise in the first place?
And as we are familiar with from the Garden of Eden story, the disobedience leads to the suffering of the toil of your brow and childbirth, which sounds pretty mean trick to me, to be honest.
Well, let's keep it as simple as we can. And just think of another example that I often give in trying to explain what sin is. There is light. If I look at light, my face is lit. And if I turn away, my face is in shadow, isn't it? Light and darkness. And what's darkness? Darkness is not knowing, it's getting it wrong, isn't it? It's not, we can't see, so we're blind. Blind lead the blind. Ignorance is sin, and hence we fall into all sorts of misfortune. So, basically it's as simple as that, isn't it? And the word repentance simply means turn back to the light, turn back to God.
And so you could say we bring it upon ourselves, and it's what do we say, a natural part of the human condition? Is there human life without suffering?
Well, we have to drop the adjective human. As the phrase comes into my mind, we are the architects of our own misfortune. It's an old, long-established saying, isn't it? It doesn't stop, of course, old age and things creeping on, but I've just had a week away by the seaside, and before we started you looked at me and you said, what did you say? You said, I look refreshed. Well, I am. I was a week by the sea, breathing sea air. It's meant to do you good, isn't it? It has done me good. I do. I feel refreshed. The first morning when I walked up to the church after coming back, I floated up. Yeah, I felt full of life. It does have an effect. And you know, so, sorry, I've gone off the point, have I? You know, by many such little examples, we know what. Oh, I know, you talked about unnatural. Well, you see, the whole human condition, we talk about nature, but the nature we're familiar with is really a result of sin. That's why it dies, because death is the consequence of sin. And not only you and me, but everything, the plants, the animals, everything dies, doesn't it? And nature is a process of eat and be eaten. So wonderful though it is, what we call nature is actually, in the real sense, unnatural. If we can even conceive a nature, if we conceive, words just become meaningless, don't they? We go outside of words. But there is most certainly a reality that we may glimpse in the depths of meditation, some of us, where this human performance, this human, whatever you call it, this human, it just drops out of existence, doesn't it? You forget about it. You discover a higher reality, a higher existence. When I talk, you discover, as though it's a few blessed individuals have glimpsed it and borne witness, but for the vast majority of us, of course, it's beyond our conceptions.
Life in the spirit.
Life in the spirit, exactly. That's what the scriptures talk of, isn't it? The kingdom of God, the kingdom of spirit.
It seems a bit of a rough deal that we only get a glimpse of it in this performance.
Sin is a rough deal.
Well, that is the Christian line, if I can put it that way, which I'm very familiar with because I'm Christian. I'm not Buddhist, but if I was, the first of the noble truths, I believe, is life is suffering. So if we call Buddhism a religion, which is probably not, but let's say a perspective on life and spirit, they're ganging up. The crosshairs, they both point and cross, emphasizing suffering as the human condition, which I can be honest with you, John, makes me rankle, if that's the right word. No, I don't think so. You're looking at me like I've sworn.
Well, I think it's a matter of words, Phil, what we mean by it. You see, you quoted then, the Buddha said life is suffering. Well, what do we mean by life in that context? You know, life is a big word. It's, what are we talking about? Mortal life or immortal life?
I think let's stick with mortal life.
Well, not all the time. It's a mixture, isn't it? At the end of my life, the prospect of moving on, I can't say I'm sorry. I can say bye-bye to it with a smile. I've had my good times. I've shed a few tears on the way, but...
You're ready to stack your cards?
Basically, I'm ready to move on.
From this preparatory school,
Preparatory school, I like to call it, yes.
Well, just to break it down into simple aspects, what do we mean by suffering? It seems to me there are three aspects we can probably all agree on. Physical suffering, pain, and I think we could agree that whilst it seems to be unavoidable whilst we're in this mortal fleshly body at some time in our life, and for many people more than others, that's a given, but that's pain. But the second thing is, shall we say, our response to pain or our response to life situations. So in other words, our mental and emotional response. We may live in a state of suffering, mental suffering, emotional suffering, and thirdly, a bit more esoteric perhaps, what I would call existential suffering. The sort of, one of your favourite, I think, biblical verses is, life is a vale of tears. Is that?
No, it's not the Bible.
It's not the Bible. Oh, I beg your pardon. Take that back. But it's still one of your favourite sayings, this vale of tears. Well, my veil is very green. How green was my veil? to misquote a Welsh poet, I think. So we have slightly different views on there are unavoidable aspects of suffering, sure. But then there is our response to suffering, particularly mental and emotional, and you've had more than your fair share of that. So what's the origin of that?
Well, you're asking me to comment on the mental, emotional suffering,
yes,
are you not on the other aspects of it?
I will say, John, that I have not once heard you complain about pain, even though you've got dicky feet and legs, and not once. So, respect. You're not a complainer, but you are a sufferer.
Where does it come from, Phil? Well, today is Monday, is market day, and a few weeks ago we had some visitors here, and one of them was a girl from Romania who was familiar with sheep, was interested in sheep, and so I invited her to come to the market, because we have a very large cattle and sheep market here in Bakewell, one of the largest in the country, with thousands of sheep sold every week and cattle. Anyway, I took her there. And there was another girl with her, an American girl who was more of a sort of, not really a country girl. And it was her first experience of looking at sheep, I think. Anyway, there you are. We were walking up and down the pens, and I was commenting on the Lamb of God, and on sin, and on how is it that these lovely lambs are all taken to be killed. Whose fault is it? What's it all about? Why? Which I find a deeply a deeply meaningful illustration of the effect of humanity of the effect of you and me. People want to eat, so these things have to happen. These lovely lambs have to go to be killed. Well, no doubt, even in nature, look at every lovely little deer or something is born to be eaten by a wolf or tiger or something, aren't they? Or if not, when they die, we're eaten by maggots. It's all pretty grim when you start looking at it, isn't it? Well, anyway, these girls at the market were crying. I was crying too, because I also am deeply moved by these creatures. I love them. And we were thinking about it. Why do we suffer? It's really love, isn't it? It's seeing the beloved in pain. That's why we suffer. Why did Jesus suffer? Why did Jesus bear the cross? And we all know when you love someone and you see that person in difficulties, you want to bear their pain, don't you? It's a natural human emotion. You want to, if I could take your pain off you, I would. That's the way we feel, isn't it? And if I could somehow make that situation with those lambs, if I could somehow, so they didn't die, so death didn't exist, so nothing had to be killed and eaten, wouldn't I do it? And don't I feel pain? And didn't I bear their pain? Why did I go to Russia? To bear the cross of my ancestors, of my family, annihilated in the communist revolution? Wasn't that an act of love to do that? There's a deeply meaningful, very common phrase, widespread in Russia. Russia's particular destiny is to bear the human cross. Isn't that an act of love? Why did God suffer for us? God so loved the world that he sent his Son to suffer on the cross and die for us, to bear, to help to alleviate the effect of sin. Hence, that sort of unselfish suffering is a blessing. Indeed, there's another sort of suffering, of course, which is poor me, self-pity, which is another matter altogether. Because we always need to be watchful when we discuss these things. There are two aspects, the pure and the impure. The pure, of course, is ego-centered. No, the impure is ego-centered. The pure is free of ego, unselfish. Selfish or unselfishness.
I think you've touched on something very helpful and important there. There's, can I put it this way? There's virtuous suffering and there's ego, yes. Poor little me suffering.
That's right, yes, that's correct.
How much did that perspective influence you, particularly when you were a younger man? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, you were tempted, I think, to, I won't say become a monk, but I think you'd have been quite happy in a cave or some sort of deprivation.
Absolutely, Phil. Yes, it was one of my dreams as a young man to go up into the Himalayas or somewhere and find a cave and meditate. That's after I'd begun to discover a bit about meditation, the possibilities of it. Yes, indeed. Yes, and I've been in and out of a few monasteries in my time.
What's the attraction?
Well, the first attraction was, I suppose, I don't think it was ever so much a desire to escape from the world, because I was always very responsible. But I did begin to understand that there is no greater service to the world than the work of prayer or meditation. And a life dedicated to that seemed to me the best of options. But then I came, in fact, somebody once said to me, a wise old man, as I was talking about this, I'd been staying in a monastery and I was tempted to go back and become a monk. And he said to me, it's much easier to be a monk in a monastery than a monk in the world. And that immediately made me turn to the option of being a monk in the world, because it was being the harder, more difficult way to go. And I've got one of those perverted natures that always goes the most difficult way. Isn't that strange? Where does that come from?
You might almost say, like a moth to a flame, goes John to his suffering.
I know, so strange, isn't it? Although actually, what it really is, I think when I more deeply understood, you see, I think the greater work is to embrace as much of the world as is given one, as much of the world as one can, and then raise it, you see. This is the greater work. So in a way, the more awful, the more one experiences and is open to the worst as well as the best of life, the more. I'm not expressing it very well, but well, anyway, I didn't become a monk. I've stayed in the world and I don't regret it. It may be easier in a monastery. It suits some people, but I don't know why I'm living in a little town. I thought I'd end my days on my own farm, sitting under my apple trees in the sunlight. Said I was living in a little flat, in a little town, surrounded by people. I don't know why. It wasn't my choice. This was the way life has ended up.
Next to the post office.
Next to the post office. Why aren't I in a monastery? I don't know.
Wasn't it the London School of Meditation where you were taught? Weren't you slightly disappointed when your tutor, or whoever you call them...
Yes, good for remembering that, Phil. Yes, I was disappointed at the School of Meditation, as Phil says. We were told that our way is the way of the householder, and it isn't the way of the recluse. And I was disappointed. I would have liked to have been given a hair shirt and told to go off into a cave. That's what I fancied then. No, I had to live in the world. Yes.
Hair shirt, locusts, self-flagellation, John?
Well, maybe. Yes.
You're a big fan of sort of somewhat extreme monks in desert places. I think you've read quite a few. They've got particularly long beards, and they all look very ascetic. What's the attraction?
Well, I never cared much about that side, but I always hoped a lion might come and visit me. Then I'd have been chuffed, like a dog with two tails with a pet lion.
You actually mean that, don't you?
Of course I do.
Just tell us about that Christmas Day when you had a special visitor in the desert. I think you were in, where were you?
I was in Namibia, in the Namibian desert, and my car broke down. And it was actually on Christmas Eve. And you know, I had the happiest Christmas I've ever had. It was absolutely out of this world. And there were some rocks not far away, and I climbed up among those rocks, and I found a cave. And I spent, what was it, a couple of nights, 2 or 3 nights in this cave, Christmas Day. Oh, it was absolutely, it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And on a couple of occasions, when I was meditating, I heard a little noise. Opened my eyes. There was a desert fox. Came to visit me. Sniffed around. Unbelievable. Then the next night he came again. That was one of the greatest gifts I've ever received in this life. My silly old eyes are full of tears just to remember it. Oh, what a wonderful thing to happen. Of course, there's desert nights. That's quite something.
But you've not always been overcome with tears of joy in desert places, John. You have taken yourself off to the desert and cried other types of tear, haven't you?
I have indeed. Yes, I have. Well, deserted places. Yes, I have. Yes, I've wept plenty of tears of all sorts, tears of pity and tears of self-pity. Oh yes. Of course, anyone that embarks on this search for God has to encounter their own sin, has to encounter their own ego all the way. There's no escape. You can't just opt out of the ego just like that. People ask me, how can I get rid of my ego? Ha ha. Who's ever got rid of their ego? It's something we have to live with throughout our lives. We may maybe diminish it somewhat, or at least not take it too importantly.
Couldn't we say transcend the ego? I think it's very unkind to the ego. We wouldn't get very far without a functioning ego.
I don't like that, being too unkind about it. It's part of the show, isn't it? It's not there without a purpose. And well, you can transcend it sometimes to some degree, can't we? But it's got a way of creeping back in again. You know, however long you meditate, you get hungry, don't you? Or sleepy. You start itching or something.
Just remind us of, I would say, I didn't know you then, but from your books and talking about it, I would say your greatest suffering was after that excruciating love experience, and you took off well, you left your farm. Yes. What was that suffering about?
Oh, yes. Yes, that happened when I was 47. Gosh, just 40 years ago, isn't it? Yeah, 40 years ago. Well, I looked into the eyes of a woman and seen the infinite beyond. Right through her, looked into her eyes. And then, of course, I found myself back in the world of people. Her and me. We were both married. What could we do? She had children. There was, and she didn't see it. I saw it. So I couldn't just stay there forever. I was cast back into the world of humanity. I lost it. Or did I lose it? Well, when I meditated, to some extent, I rediscovered it. But it took me many years to realize that what I lost in this world, I could find in spirit. And this was one of the great motives that have kept me going. And it was, and it's awful when you words fail me. What do you call it? Heaven, a glimpse of heaven or something, and you find yourself back in this world because you know the contrast. So in a way, the enormity of sin became even worse, and I felt the terrible loneliness of not only losing her, but of losing anyone I could share it with. I mean, who else has that experience? I never. Well, if there are some people, I didn't know them. They weren't available to me.
So you'd had a glimpse of heaven, and then you were dashed.
Dashed, indeed, dashed back. If people ask what is hell, I don't know, but it's losing heaven, I suppose. The degree to which heaven is revealed, the worse it is when you lose it.
I've not read it because it's not out yet, but I think your next book will have something to say about the suffering of that time.
Very much so, yes. Yes, because it records a correspondence of many years, actually a 40-year correspondence with this particular woman. Yes, indeed, because we kept in touch.
I didn't know that. I thought it was just the period where you had an unrequited relationship.
No. Well, because the most intense correspondence relates to that time and a few years after that. But yes, we've kept a sketchy connection ever since.
Is this suffering of the heart or suffering of the spirit?
Well, what's the difference?
One's human, unrequited, or you say, you might, well, in Buddhist terms, I'm out of my depth here, you appreciate, I'm a complete novice on Buddhist issues, but isn't the source of suffering desire? So you desire this woman in this particular case, and it's out of reach, and so there is suffering. That's human, but there's also a spiritual dimension, is there?
Oh, that phrase, the source of it being desire, that would be impure suffering, wouldn't it? Because desire is a thing of the ego.
No, it's really a human love story, yes. And I'm just wondering whether the suffering that you experienced was a human thing or a...
In the higher world, as described in the book of Revelation, God shall wipe every tear from our eyes. There's no suffering there. But we are talking of the human world. And when I talk of Christ's suffering, that is because Christ, in his human form, I've got to be very careful here. I'm not sure. I'm treading on thin ice. It's said that the angels weep, don't they? I'm not quite sure. Well, what does that mean? Higher beings, compassionate. Buddha's called the compassionate one, isn't he? Compassion would be pure suffering, wouldn't it? Pure.
I'm not so sure, John. I'm not trying to be tricky about this. I'm not trying to be clever about it either, actually. I'm just trying to be sort of compassionate about... we all have our own, shall we say, private sufferings. And I suppose what I'm really getting at is back to the beginning. Do we create our own suffering simply because we fall in love with someone, it's unrequited, and the human heart is torn, and that's the way it is?
It's so difficult to try to pin these things down, isn't it? Love is how does it go? A many splendid thing, has so many aspects to it, aren't there? Pure and impure. I think that's what makes this book very interesting, because it reveals the whole spectrum of suffering, from the most awful self-pity to the sublime, really, and up and down, the way that one is cast up and down, just like a cork on the ocean, honestly.
When can we read it?
It's been a long time coming to birth, isn't it? Hopefully, we live in hope. I've even got the illustrations in now. It can't be much longer.
Just to sort of bring it to a conclusion, John, you're no spring chicken. You've lived a bit. You've visited 5 continents, and you have suffered. Whether self-made or a spiritual virtue, we'll leave that aside. What lessons have you brought back for us from the land of suffering?
There are many lessons from the land of suffering, but the lesson that trumps all others is that here now, in our mortal bodies, there is that which is transcendent, this level of consciousness that is pure being. And actually I saw very, very clearly, just very recently, I was looking into somebody's eyes, and I saw that same pure, infinite being. If I was to put something across my eyes like that, so that you just see my eyes, and forget about all this down here, just see my eyes. Of course my eyes are old and cloudy now, but maybe you can see, let's just call it a light, even through the clouds. My fading eyes, there is a light, as there is in yours. If I look into your pupils, the side of your pupils, there's a little pinpoint of light there, not the actual eye, but a light that shines in your eye, through your eye. Now that light, is that your light, or is it light? Light. Without any qualification. It's not Phil's light. And I've got the same light, haven't I? And everybody has. Those sheep in the market have it. One light. And how is God described? God is light. That one. And this is in another realm, isn't it? A realm of light, where there is no darkness at all. So the ultimate answer to all our worldly suffering and pain, this is what's called, as Jesus tells us, seek first the kingdom of God, which is this light. That is the great lesson of life. And to whatever extent we get it or even believe in it. We not only save ourselves, but help others.
Of course, Jesus famously said, well, he is called the light of the world. But rather more surprisingly, he called his disciples and us the light. You are the light of the world.
We are commanded, aren't we, to as best we're able, to convey that light. Jesus bids us shine with as a small clear light, like a little candle burning in the night. In this world of darkness, we must shine, you in your small corner, and I in mine. Here we are. God bless you all. Thank you for listening.